Ojibwe people believe in the healing power of music and dance. I've discovered that the jingle dress dance and tradition first emerged during a global epidemic of influenza a century ago, one that was devastating to Ojibwe communities. This was also a time when the United States outlawed ritualistic dancing, making the jingle dress dance a radical tradition from its beginning. More recently, jingle dress dancers were at Standing Rock to protest a pipeline project that threatens our water. The tradition is very much alive today, invigorated by the passion and creativity of a new generation of women. I became interested in studying the jingle dress because my grandmother was a jingle dress dancer when I was growing up. And when I started teaching Indian history, I began to have questions about its origin. And I wondered, how old is it? Is this something we've always done? So I started looking for historic photographs of jingle dress dancers. And I realized I couldn't really find a photo of what you would call a jingle dress or jingle dress dancer before circa 1920 in the United States or Canada. And so that really is what kind of put me on the path to studying and wanting to learn more about the history of the jingle dress dance. I think all Ojibwe people, and now many American Indian people across the United States, feel very connected to the jingle dress dance and tradition. I'm connected to it because of my grandmother. The tradition appeared to kind of skip a couple of generations. When I was a little girl, it was mostly performed by older women in the community. Something happened in the 1980s so that the tradition expanded beyond Ojibwe and Dakota communities. It became very popular. And now my daughter, who's a freshman at the University of Minnesota, is a jingle dress dancer, just like her great-grandmother. Ojibwe people often tell a story about a little girl who was very near death. And her father and her family became, of course, very worried about her. Her father had a dream, a vision about a special dress and dance. He made the dress for his daughter and taught her the steps. The way folks at Mille Lacs tell the story is that there was a drum ceremony taking place that weekend, and the father brought his sick daughter to the drum ceremony. She was sort of lying on the side, taking it easy because she was so ill. Later on in the evening, they started playing these songs, and the little girl got up and began dancing. And by the end of the evening, she had recovered. I started putting together the story of the jingle dress with the flu epidemic because of that story, because it was a very flu-like illness that it seemed that the girl had. And those of us, we've all had the flu. You feel like you're going to die, you're near death, you're not going to survive. And then you kind of turn a corner. And that's what that story sort of said to me as well. And so Ojibwe people still tell the story of the first jingle dress dancer who was a little girl. Ojibwe people connect the jingle dress dance tradition to healing. And I should say that it's the dress, it's the dance, and it's also the songs. So I call it a tradition because it's more than just the dress itself. Ojibwe people believe that spiritual power moves through air. And if you've ever been to a powwow and you've heard dozens of Ojibwe women dancing together in jingle dresses, it makes an incredible sound. And so the sound of the tinkling of jingle dresses is part of healing. But it is very much in line with how Ojibwe people view the world and how they view spiritual power. We have an exhibit that shows the history and the evolution of the dress itself. It's at the Mille Lacs Museum, and the response has been really great from the community. When we first opened the exhibit, the community wanted to dance in the old dresses, as they put it. And so women came to the museum and danced throughout the museum, and we had almost like a mini powwow on the grounds of the museum that day. They were very happy to be reconnected to these older historic dresses in the exhibit. So it's been great. And I also think it's educated a lot of non-Indian people about some of our cultural traditions. Many people, when they go to a powwow today, they look at Native people dancing and wearing their wonderful powwow attire, and they think they're seeing something ancient. Now, aspects of powwows can be very old, but the jingle dress is really about modernity. Native people are always seen as historic people rather than contemporary people. And I think what the jingle dress expresses is how Native people are part of the making of the modern world and how they are also influenced by World War I or the big flu pandemic, like other people were who were alive in the early 20th century. Today, I think we have a certain idea of what the jingle dress is, but when we go back and look at dresses from its first decade of the 1920s, the dresses really follow women's dress styles of the era. And so dresses from the 1920s, its first decade, really look like flapper dresses. One dress is a very old Dakota dress, which shows that the jingle dress, which evolved in Ojibwe communities in central Minnesota, perhaps also in Ontario around Whitefish Bay, that they very soon passed to our Dakota neighbors, and it became a kind of regional tradition early on. So I like that very early Dakota. It's actually a skirt that's in the exhibition. There were other dresses. It's almost like there are two exhibitions in a sense. One is the historical dresses behind the glass cases from the Historical Society, and there's another area where women from the communities here in Minnesota brought in their jingle dresses. One dress that was very special is from Vanessa Northrup, who's from the Fond du Lac community in Minnesota, and she made her police uniform into a jingle dress. And that one is very popular in the exhibit. There's another dress in the exhibit that Lee Staples, who is also known as Obazan, who's a spiritual leader from central Minnesota, he asked us if we wanted his mother's dress in the exhibit. Lee himself is about in his 70s now. And so we said, of course, we'd love to have your mother's dress in the exhibit. There are a lot of stories about the jingles themselves, which folks tend to always think are made from Copenhagen snuff can lids, from tobacco can lids. And Obazan's mother's dress is made from old baking soda can lids. So when you turn them up and look inside, they're red. They're very pretty. The dresses have evolved and changed, but I think the meaning of the dresses and the dance and the tradition have pretty much stayed the same throughout the past century.
It's hard to describe the feeling when you're out there dancing. It has helped me tremendously, because there was a time in my life where I was so stuck. I survived the Red Lake High School shooting. I got pregnant when I was 17 with my son, and I feel like I put myself through a lot at a young age. 22 when I got my GED, and now I just finished my second semester at BSU. I started dancing because I've probably been 2 or 3 when I got my first jingle dress. My mom, she had it made for me. We were living in South Minneapolis at the time, and there's a gap from when I was 10 all the way up until I was 27. It was actually through my kids where I got back into dancing. They're all a year apart, so I had my kids back to back to back. I knew that when I had my girls that I wanted to push them to be the best that they could be, doing really good in school, but also how fast they have picked up our cultural practices with dancing. Also, for their original style jingle dresses, the dance, you go forward, you don't go backwards, you don't spin, and you go in a zigzag. I feel like for me, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just pushing myself and going forward. No matter what goes on in life, I'm just always going forward. Everybody has been uploading their videos to this dance special page. There's like 70,000 members in that page. They have noted how healing it is to watch us dance. When I was recording that sidestep special along the shores of Red Lake, I felt really empowered because I thought of our ancestors who have fought for this. I thought of everybody that I've lost growing up, because I did lose a lot of friends to suicide, and then with the shooting, you know, I keep all of them in mind when I dance.
It's a radical tradition because at the time the jingle dress arose, around circa 1920 in the United States, powwows were essentially illegal. Ritualistic dancing was banned from the Indian office. There was a famous circular, in fact, that came out of the Indian office in Washington in the 1920s banning ritualistic dancing on reservations. Most people don't realize that Native American religious traditions have been suppressed to this degree. People today might think, well, what's the harm in a powwow? But at the time the jingle dress arose, Native American children were in government boarding schools, our languages were being suppressed, our dancing and powwow traditions were being suppressed, and it was all part of the assimilation movement. Native people were not supposed to be Native people anymore, or practice our traditions, or even speak our language. And so this is the atmosphere in which this new tradition began. So when it's been used in popular protest movements of the last few years, Idle No More in Canada, the Standing Rock protests against the pipeline project in the Midwest, to me, it's not something new. It's always been part of the jingle dress dance tradition. I find that as a historian, what interests me most is the small human story, which is why the jingle dress story in history appeals to me so much, because it starts out with a small story about a little girl who appears to be near death and her father wants to do something to save her life. So that's what's always attracted me to studying history. And it's not really until I see the small stories on the ground, jingle dress dancers at Mille Lacs and so forth, that I ever get to the big picture of what were American Indian people doing during World War I or during the flu epidemic. think something was wrong with me because in graduate school, everybody seemed to have the big questions, and I was always looking at these sort of little human stories. But that's what attracts me to the study of history, is the small human story.